In desperation, the bankrupt millionaire gave his last pocket money to a boy standing on the street. "Sir, I know how to save your company." The man was stunned, amazed, not believing what he heard. The wind clawed at the glass panes on the 31st floor of the coal industries building, dragging clouds like bruises across the grey Seattle sky. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city moved in silent miniature, distant, cold, and oblivious. Inside, the office smelled of burnt coffee and something older, quiet desperation. Richard Cole sat motionless, elbows on the edge of his polished desk, eyes locked on a spreadsheet he hadn't blinked at for the last 4 minutes. Red numbers glared back at him like bloodied teeth. Unpaid debts, evaporated accounts, frozen assets. He slowly leaned back, pressing the bridge of his nose between 2 fingers. Across from him, Samuel Grant adjusted his tie for the 3rd time in 2 minutes. His briefcase sat unopened at his feet, as if even it had nothing left to offer. "You understand," Samuel said finally, voice low. "Even if you sold this tower, Richard, it wouldn't cover half the outstanding loans." Richard didn't look at him. He tapped a knuckle softly against the glass edge of his desk. "There's still something missing. A gap. A lie. I feel it." "You're not wrong," Samuel said after a pause. "You're just out of time." A silence stretched between them, heavy like cement. Somewhere in the office, the old espresso machine hissed once before going quiet. The only other sound was the dull tick of the wall clock, counting down something neither of them had a name for. "Do they know?" Richard asked, his voice quieter now. "The creditors?" Samuel nodded slowly. "They've begun circling. One's already filed a preliminary notice. You'll get the letter this week." Richard exhaled through his nose and stood. The movement was sharp, abrupt. He walked over to the tall window and looked down. Cars streamed through the rain-slicked streets below, taillights glowing faint red through the drizzle. He spotted a boy, no older than 12, wiping windshields at the corner, his soaked hoodie clinging to his shoulders. The boy looked up toward the building once, for just a second, then turned away. Richard didn't know why he noticed. A knock on the door broke the silence. Olivia Tran, his assistant, stepped in carrying 2 coffee cups and a folder tucked beneath one arm. Her face was pale and unreadable behind her glasses. "I thought you could use this," she said, setting one of the cups on the edge of his desk. She glanced at Samuel. "Good morning, Mr. Grant." Samuel offered a strained smile. "Miss Tran." Richard took the cup without drinking from it. "What's the folder?" "Daily summary. And one more thing." She hesitated. "Ms. Mahoney from Cascade Bank called again. She asked if you'd be available for a private meeting tomorrow." Richard looked back at her slowly. "What did she say?" Olivia swallowed. "Only that she's adjusting her expectations." Her words, not mine. Richard gave a dry laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course she is." She sounded less like a banker, more like someone disappointed, Olivia added, uncertain. "I can cancel if you prefer." "Number, keep it," he said, turning away. "Let her say it to my face." As Olivia nodded and stepped back out, Samuel leaned forward. "She used to be your ally, right? Back when Cascade funded your Series B." Richard grunted. "Once." His phone buzzed. A message from Jonah Ruiz, one of the IT juniors, lit up on screen. "Jonah, need a word when you're free. Not urgent, just weird stuff in the access logs." He made a mental note and pushed the phone aside. Samuel stood, gathering his coat. "I'll draft a contingency letter to the board. It won't stop the fall, but it may slow the panic." "I won't sign it," Richard said. "You might not have a choice soon." Samuel's voice was gentle, but final. "I always have a choice," Richard said quietly. The door clicked shut behind him. Alone again, Richard walked toward the shelf by the far wall. Among awards and dusty trade publications stood a single photo frame. He picked it up. His father, lean and laughing in a wool coat, his mother in gloves and a green scarf. A younger version of himself, not yet shaped by boardrooms and losses, stood between them. Behind them, a modest 2-acre farm outside Tacoma, the beginning of everything. He set the photo down slowly. The rain had thickened into mist. The windshield boy below had disappeared. He turned toward the espresso machine, made himself a second cup he didn't want. As the machine hissed again, Olivia re-entered. "Sorry," she said quietly. "Jonah just came up. He says it's important now." Jonah Ruiz stepped in behind her, damp from the walk across departments. The kid looked like he hadn't slept. "Mr. Cole," Jonah began, pulling out a USB. "I don't want to overstep, but I found something off in the finance server. Files deleted but not cleanly. Like someone didn't expect to be found." Richard didn't move. Jonah added, "There are timestamps. Someone's been logging in after hours." Richard looked at him now. Really looked. The boy wasn't guessing, he was certain. "Send it to me, and not a word to anyone," Richard said. "You're doing the right thing." Jonah nodded and slipped out. Olivia lingered. "You still think there's a way out, don't you?" she asked softly. Richard's answer came after a beat. "No." He walked back to the window. "I think there's still a way through." Outside, the clouds pressed lower over Seattle, and the boy on the corner had returned, this time wiping a windshield with deliberate care, like someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The boardroom on the 29th floor was a study in sterile precision. Glass walls, brushed steel fixtures, and a long matte black table that swallowed sound. No warmth lingered here, only the chill of calculated decisions. Richard entered to find 5 of the 7 chairs already filled. No one looked up. Grace Holloway, head of HR, gave the faintest nod. Beside her sat Victor Reed's replacement, someone Richard didn't recognize, already rifling through notes with the smooth indifference of a man installed, not hired. The chair at the end, Howard Levin's, stood empty. "Howard's not attending," Richard asked, closing the door behind him. Logan Pierce, leaning back with one leg crossed elegantly over the other, tapped a Mont Blanc pen against the glass tabletop. "Tack, tack, tack." "He's taking some time," Logan said, tone casual. "He's been feeling the weight lately. Stepped back to let us breathe." "We don't breathe without a spine," Richard replied, taking his seat. Silence spread like smoke. Logan smiled slightly, pen pausing midair. "Isn't that why we're here? To decide whether the spine still functions?" Richard didn't blink. "I wasn't aware we were holding a vote on my body parts today." Across from him, Grace stiffened. Her hands, clasped tightly in her lap, didn't move. "I think what Logan means," she said carefully, "is that the board is anxious. With the numbers where they are, and the recent movement from creditors—" "Cut the varnish, Grace," Logan interrupted, still smiling. "What we're all thinking is, maybe it's time Richard took some strategic rest. Let fresher instincts navigate the storm." "Tack, tack." Richard leaned forward slightly, voice low and measured. "I'm still the one signing your paychecks, Logan. Try to remember that." "Oh, I never forget who's holding the pen," Logan said, uncrossing his legs. "But I've also learned that hands shake, eventually." No one laughed. Even the new COO shifted in his seat. Richard glanced at the spot where Victor used to sit. Clean, bare, erased. "Speaking of," he said, "when was this change made?" The new guy glanced up, confused. Logan answered, "Victor's transition was expedited. Performance review flagged concerns. I moved fast." "You didn't consult me?" "It didn't require executive sign-off." Logan tilted his head. "We're operating under emergency guidelines." "That was temporary," Richard said, sharper now. Logan met his gaze. "So are companies that don't adapt." Tack. Richard's fingers curled slowly against the underside of the table, knuckles whitening. A blue vein pulsed near the bone of his wrist. From the hallway, the sound of footsteps broke the tension. The door opened. Victor Reed stepped in. His overcoat dripped from the rain, shoulders squared, jaw tight. "Someone sent me the wrong meeting time," he said, eyes scanning the room. "But I see I'm no longer needed." Richard stood slowly. "I didn't approve your removal." "No," Victor said, "but someone made sure you didn't have to." He glanced once, flatly, at Logan, then turned on his heel and left. Logan reached for his water. That was awkward. Richard turned toward Grace. "You signed off on this?" "I wasn't given the full picture," she said, her voice tight. "You weren't given a picture at all," Richard corrected, standing now. "This isn't a boardroom anymore. It's a stage." Logan sighed. "Is this the part where you storm out, or the part where you realize the audience isn't clapping anymore?" Richard looked at him. Really looked. Not the practiced smile, not the careful calm, but the gleam behind it. The hunger. Jonah's message from earlier stirred in the back of his mind. Files deleted, accessed at odd hours, someone who didn't expect to be found. He adjusted the cuffs of his shirt slowly. "We'll revisit this after I speak with Howard," Richard said evenly. "And after I review the documents this board seems so eager to act on without me." "You do that," Logan replied. "Take all the time you need. No rush. The building's still standing, for now." Richard walked to the door. As he reached it, Logan's voice came one more time. "Richard." He stopped. "You built something remarkable, but maybe it's time you let the survivors decide how to save it." Richard didn't turn around. "I survived more than you know," he said quietly, "and I remember the faces of men who tried to smile while cutting my throat." He left without another word. Back in his office, the espresso machine had cooled. Rain traced lines across the windows. He stood there, watching the city blur again, jaw tight. Somewhere in the digital hum of the building's network, buried beneath financial reports and red-stamped notices, a ghost trail waited. A fracture in the system, a hand reaching for something it shouldn't. He would find it. And when he did, no one would smile. Not even Logan. Before continuing, comment "pizza" if you are watching at night. Rain crawled down the windshield like slow, deliberate fingers, painting the city in streaks of grey. Traffic moved in hesitant bursts, stoplights blinking through the mist like distant warnings. Richard Cole sat behind the wheel, unmoving, while the world swirled in chaos beyond the glass. He hadn't meant to be here. His hands had found the steering wheel after the board meeting, after Logan's smirk, after Victor's silence, after Grace looked away. He'd pulled out of the underground garage without thinking, past the checkpoint, down through Belltown, and now sat at a stoplight somewhere between nowhere and going under. The radio was murmuring jazz, but the saxophone felt dishonest, too smooth, too indulgent. He clicked it off mid-note, silence swallowing the car whole. Rain hammered the roof. On the sidewalk, a boy moved between cars, bare hands rubbing moisture off windshields with a torn rag and his own soaked sleeve. 12, maybe 13. Not begging, working. There was a sharpness in his movements, economical, fast. And when he reached Richard's car, he didn't knock. He just looked. Richard's eyes met him through the foggy glass. The boy wiped once, then again, steady, eyes never leaving Richard's. Raindrops clung to his eyebrows. His hoodie was thin, too thin for the weather, the cuffs dark with water. Richard reached into the console, pulled a few bills out of habit. He cracked the window an inch and slipped the money through. The boy didn't take it. Instead, he said, "You're Richard Cole." It wasn't a question. Richard blinked once. "What of it?" The boy lowered his hand. "I know how to save your company." Richard stared at him. The traffic light turned green, but no one honked. "What did you just say?" "I said, I know how to save your company." The boy's voice didn't shake. "And I know why it's falling apart." Richard's foot stayed frozen on the brake. Behind the boy, another child, smaller, maybe 9, stood beneath a deli awning, arms wrapped around herself. She called out faintly, "Felix, it's pouring harder." The boy, Felix, glanced back at her, then turned to Richard again. "1 minute, that's all I need." Richard studied him. Raindrops ran like threads down the side of the boy's face. His eyes were sharp, unblinking, not hopeful, certain. Richard hit the unlock button. Felix opened the passenger door and slid in like he belonged there. Water pooled beneath his shoes. His small fingers flexed once over the edge of the seat. "I only let you in," Richard said, "because you used my name correctly." Felix smirked faintly. Figured that'd count for something. Richard looked at him sideways. "You've got 1 minute. Use it well." Felix nodded, brushing hair from his eyes. "The log files on your finance server have holes. Big ones. Nighttime access from unassigned users. Overwritten entries." Richard didn't move, but the vein in his neck twitched. "And you know this because I know what to look for," Felix replied. "I watched my mum get fired for something she didn't do. She kept everything. She's good with numbers, but I'm better with patterns." A slow breath left Richard's chest. "What's your mother's name?" Felix hesitated. "Carla Blake." That name didn't just land. It detonated. The gears turned fast now. Carla, 5 years ago, quiet, diligent, let go during a hush-hush audit that found inconsistencies. She hadn't fought it. She hadn't been given time. "I remember her." Felix nodded. "She remembers you too, but she doesn't know I'm doing this." Richard's fingers flexed against the steering wheel. "And how exactly did you get access to our server logs, Felix?" "I didn't. Jonah Ruiz did. The IT kid. He doesn't know he left the back door open, but he did." Felix leaned forward. "Your board's bleeding you from the inside, Mr. Cole, and someone's making it look like your fault." Silence filled the car. The rain eased to a whisper. Outside the passenger window, the little girl under the deli awning was watching, patient, like she knew this wasn't the first time Felix had done something reckless but necessary. "Who's that?" Richard asked. "My sister," Felix said. "Mara. She thinks I'm crazy." "And are you?" Felix shrugged. "Maybe, but I'm not wrong." Richard stared ahead for a long moment. The light had gone red again. His voice came low. "You know a lot for a 12-year-old. I've had practice." Richard finally turned, not toward the road, but toward the boy beside him. "You said you know how to save my company. That's a big promise." Felix met his gaze. "I didn't say it'd be easy, but if you're willing to listen, I'll show you." Richard's hand moved toward the gearshift. Then, as if reconsidering, he leaned back and looked at the drenched sidewalk, at the girl still waiting. "You hungry?" Felix blinked. "Always." "Get her. Let's talk somewhere dry." Felix didn't smile, but his shoulders dropped slightly, like he'd just passed the first test he didn't know he was taking. He opened the door and dashed back into the rain. Richard watched him go, watched how the little girl's face lit up, how she ran to keep up as Felix waved her toward the car. The engine hummed as he sat still, hand on the wheel, mind 1,000 miles deep. Some kids begged for change, others wiped windows. But this one had come for blood. The rain had softened into a fine mist, clinging to the windshield like breath on glass. Headlights cut through the wet streets, catching puddles and turning them to pale fire. Richard drove without direction, the silence in the car more pointed than conversation. Mara was asleep in the back seat, curled against the door, her small hands tucked under her chin. Felix sat beside him in the passenger seat, arms crossed, damp sleeves rolled up just enough to show bruises that looked older than a few days. He hadn't asked for the heat to be turned on. Richard hadn't offered. They'd driven in silence for nearly 10 minutes before Felix spoke. "Do you believe people get pushed out just because they won't bow their heads?" Richard's fingers tightened on the wheel. The windshield wipers clicked in rhythmic indifference. "I believe people get pushed out for all kinds of reasons," Richard said finally. "Some fair, some not." She didn't bow. Felix stared at the dashboard, eyes distant. Not when they asked her to sign off on numbers she knew were off. Not when they offered her a bonus to keep quiet. And definitely not when she got the email. "What email?" Felix reached into his damp hoodie pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. He held it out. Richard took it with one hand, steering with the other. It was a printed email. The address header was internal. The message was short, too short for what it implied. "Your concern is noted. The matter is closed. Do not pursue further." Richard read it twice. "She sent that to compliance?" he asked. "Yeah, from her company email. The reply came an hour later. Then she was called into a meeting the next morning." Richard folded the page carefully and set it on the center console. "She never stood a chance," Felix said. Silence again, the kind that grew heavier with every mile. "She cried that night," Felix added after a pause. "Not loud. Just enough that I could hear through the wall. Then she worked, all night, like she was trying to fight something only she could see." Richard said nothing. The streetlights rolled by, yellow and lonely. "She printed everything," Felix continued. "Invoices, statements, access logs. Not because she wanted revenge, just clarity. She said lies don't dissolve in silence. They ferment." The car hit a pothole hard enough to jolt the suspension. Richard's grip slipped. The wheel lurched, sending them into the next lane for a beat before he corrected course. A horn blared. Mara stirred in the back, but didn't wake. Felix didn't flinch. "She said your name once," the boy went on. "I was sitting in the hallway. She was talking to herself, I think. She said Richard could have stopped it if he'd just read the damn note." Richard's jaw flexed. "She left a sticky note on your desk. Yellow. It said, Project Disbursement Mismatch. Alpha Ledger, off by 172,000. Richard exhaled slowly. He remembered. It had been a Thursday, late evening. He'd been rushing to prep for a call with overseas investors. The note was on top of a file. He'd read the first line, crumpled it, tossed it toward the bin. It had missed. "I didn't read past the first word," he murmured. Felix nodded like he already knew. "She kept that note," he said. "Taped it into a journal with all the others. She called it her graveyard." Richard's eyes flicked to the rear view. Mara was still asleep. The car slowed as they reached a quiet stretch by the docks. Old warehouses lined the road like forgotten sentinels. Richard pulled into an empty lot and turned off the engine. The wipers froze mid-swipe. Felix didn't look at him. He stared straight ahead. "She didn't tell me everything," he said. "But she told me enough. That she'd been pushed out for asking the wrong questions. That someone higher up had buried what she found. That no one, not HR, not legal, not even you, stood up for her." Richard let his hands rest on the wheel. "I didn't know," he said. Felix turned to him now. "You didn't ask." They sat in the idling silence, only the distant hiss of the harbour wind outside. A cargo ship honked far off, low and mournful. Richard rubbed the heel of his hand over his eyes. "She was one of the best we had," he said finally. "Never spoke much, never missed a deadline. And I never asked her why she looked tired all the time." Felix reached into his pocket again. This time, he pulled out a USB drive. "I made a copy of everything she saved. It's encrypted, but I'll unlock it for her." Richard took it without speaking. Then, softly, "Why are you doing this, Felix? You're a kid. You should be home, in school, not chasing ghosts in spreadsheets." Felix's voice was small but certain. "Because someone made her feel small, like she didn't matter, and I watched her carry that weight, alone, until she almost disappeared under it." He looked out the window now. "I want her to see that someone finally listened." A beat, then another. Finally, Richard said, "She didn't disappear." Felix turned back. "No," the boy said quietly. "She was erased. And that, more than anything, stuck." Richard started the engine again. The dashboard lit up. A warm hum filled the space between them. "Let's go find her," Richard said. Felix didn't smile, but in the way he sat up straighter, in the way he buckled his seatbelt without hesitation, the answer was loud enough. The apartment sat tucked between a laundromat and a boarded-up florist, its stoop slick with rain, the buzzer scratched and silent. A single bulb above the door flickered like it wasn't sure whether to give up. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of boiled vegetables, an old carpet shampoo. Richard stood outside the door for longer than he should have. The air was thick, not with humidity, but with hesitation. Felix and Mara stood a few paces behind him. The boy didn't speak, didn't prompt. He just watched. Richard lifted his hand, paused, then let it drop. The second time, he tapped his knuckles against the wood, light, deliberate. On the third knock, the door opened without a sound. Carla Blake stood there, no makeup, no practiced smile, just a grey cardigan over a faded t-shirt, and eyes that hadn't changed at all. They were the same ones he remembered from across conference tables and monthly performance reviews. Calm, steady, unreadable. "Who's driving?" she asked flatly, her gaze moving past him to Felix. "I am," Richard said. She nodded once. "Then you know where the road ends." Mara slipped past Richard and into the apartment like she lived there, which apparently she did. She disappeared into a side room. Felix followed silently, placing a USB stick on the small coffee table before sinking into a chair without invitation. Richard remained standing. Carla stepped aside, motioning him in without a word. The place was small, the ceilings low. A second-hand bookshelf leaned against a cracked wall. There were no family pictures. Just a corkboard full of papers, pinned in chaotic order. Receipts, emails, sticky notes in yellow and blue. Mara returned with a kettle and two mismatched mugs. She poured carefully, placing one in front of Carla. Steam rose but went untouched. "I'll make the strong one," she said under her breath. "She'll need it." Then she was gone again. Richard sat. The quiet was not comfortable. It pressed inward like insulation. Carla didn't ask why he was there. She already knew. And that, somehow, made it worse. Finally, she broke it. "Is this about closure, Richard? Or are you here to polish what's left of your name?" He didn't flinch. "I'm not here for my name," he said. "I'm here for the truth." Carla exhaled, slow and even. "I used to think that mattered. It still does. Not when no one listens." Richard nodded, accepting the blow. Across the room, Felix remained silent. Not as a child trying to behave, but as someone who knew the weight of what he'd already done. He wasn't there to bridge this gap. He was here to witness it. Carla picked up her mug, but didn't drink. "You never asked me what happened," she said. "I didn't know there was more to ask," he replied. "That's not true. You saw the note." "I didn't read past the first line." "That's not the same as not knowing." Richard leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. "I made a mistake." Carla gave him a long, flat look. "Number U made a choice. Mistakes are accidents. You chose not to look." The words landed like bricks, not loud, not fast, but undeniably heavy. He nodded again. There was no defense. "I kept everything," she said after a pause. "Not out of spite. I just couldn't throw it away, not when they tried so hard to bury it." Richard glanced at the USB on the table. "He said it's encrypted." "I taught him how." A ghost of a smile touched her lips but vanished just as quickly. "You raised him well." "I raised him alone." Another silence. Longer this time. Mara reappeared, this time with a blanket for her lap and headphones she didn't plug into anything. She sat near Felix, curled like a cat, present without participating. Richard looked around the room again. The papers, the lamp with a broken shade, the bookshelf with technical manuals and a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. "He said you called it your graveyard," he said softly. Carla's eyes moved toward the corkboard. "Every piece of paper there is a time I didn't walk away," she said, "even when walking away would have been easier. And now I'm tired." Richard leaned back. "I don't expect forgiveness." "You won't get it," she said, but without venom. "I came for the truth." Carla reached out and tapped the USB with her index finger. "That's not the truth. That's evidence. Numbers, dates, timestamps. You'll find what you're looking for in there. And you? I'm not a number." Richard didn't move. "Then help me see more." Carla studied him, not like a woman reliving betrayal, but like someone taking inventory of what was left behind. "You don't get to just decide you care again, Richard." "I'm not deciding. I'm remembering." She let the mug touch her lips, still didn't drink. The warmth was close, but never taken in. Then she said, "I don't keep the truth for myself. But if you want it, you'd better be ready to hear it. Really hear it, for the first time." "I'm listening now," he said. She looked at him, long and level. "Then listen close, because it's not just about me anymore. It's about what they've done since, and what they're still doing." Richard glanced at Felix. The boy met his eyes, steady. "What do you want from me?" Carla asked. Richard didn't answer immediately. "I want to fix what I broke. Even if it's too late for us, it's not too late for the truth." For the first time, Carla leaned back in her chair. It wasn't an invitation, but it also wasn't a goodbye. And for now, that was enough. Outside the window, the night stretched out in layers of dark blue and sodium streetlight. The radiator clicked in slow, tired pulses, its warmth uneven and tentative. Inside the living room, the walls closed in, not from size, but from the weight of what they were about to unearth. Carla stood in front of the shelf near the back wall, her fingers running over the spines of books and binders like they were memories, not materials. She pulled one aside, revealing a shallow alcove. Behind it, a small lockbox sat tucked into the shadows. Felix watched from the couch, legs crossed, arms folded, not impatient, not expectant, just still. Richard stood near the kitchen doorway, hands in his coat pockets, his shoulders squared as if preparing for a blow. Carla peeled a yellow post-it from the corkboard above her desk and held it up to the light. 4 numbers, barely legible under fading ink. "Never trusted my memory," she murmured, punching the digits into the lockbox. It clicked open. Inside were several folders, some with broken elastic ties, some simply held together with time and stubbornness. She lifted the top one and opened it slowly, like the air inside might still carry the breath of the day she'd sealed it. The pages weren't organized by date or department. They were layered like sediment. Handwritten annotations in red ink, printed emails with subject lines trimmed by early 2000s formatting, ledger printouts, margins filled with notes. Each page told a story that had never been heard. Richard stepped forward, his voice careful. "You kept all of it?" Carla didn't look at him. "I wasn't saving it. I was surviving it." She laid the first stack on the coffee table, then another. In the third folder, near the bottom, a paper-clipped bundle slipped free and scattered across the table. Richard bent to collect them, but Carla was already reaching. They both froze when they saw it. A copy of a vendor contract, clean formatting, generic boilerplate, except for one thing. The approval signature. Logan Pierce. "I thought this one was gone," Carla said quietly, voice brittle. "It vanished from the drive 3 days before I was let go." Richard took the page, squinted at the metadata code in the footer. "This contract, it's from a shell company," he said. Felix sat forward. "Check the transfer routing." Richard flipped the second page, and there it was. The wire transfer number routed funds not to a supplier, but to a private account hidden behind a tiered holding firm in Delaware. Jesus Christ. "Logan signed off on it," Carla said, "but the encryption log for that approval didn't match. Jonah confirmed it for me before they shut my access down." Right on cue, Richard's phone buzzed on the table. He picked it up. "Jonah R. Sir, I know it's late, but I found something. Call me when you can. You're going to want to see this." Richard's jaw tightened. "He found something," he said aloud. Felix stood and moved to the table, placing another sheet beside the contract. "There's a second version of this," the boy said. "Same contract ID, different routing number. This one's the sanitized copy. The one in the company records, the forged one." Carla nodded. "I printed both before they scrubbed the originals. Felix matched them line by line last year." Richard looked between them. "He's 12. "Doesn't mean he's wrong," Carla said. The room was heavy with stillness. Then Carla reached for another file, this one marked only with a red sticker in the corner. She opened it to reveal a single printed email, no sender listed, no subject, just one sentence. "People who know too much don't live long enough to tell it." "I got that a week after I was fired," she said. Richard looked up from the page. "You think it was a threat?" Carla's voice was even. "I think it was a reminder." She handed him a flash drive, black and unmarked. "This has the rest. Audio from a team meeting 6 months before my dismissal. Logan didn't know the mic was on. He said enough." Felix added, "I cleaned the audio." Background noise removed. His voice is clear. Richard took the drive, stared at it like it weighed more than it should. "I don't know what to say." Felix said it for him. "Say you'll use it." Richard looked at Carla again. The years showed differently on her now, not as time lost, but as armor earned. "I will," he said. "I'll start with the board." Carla crossed her arms. "Be careful. Logan didn't erase me for fun. He did it because it was profitable. I'm not afraid of him." "You should be." Richard didn't argue. He tucked the flash drive into his jacket. Felix returned to his seat beside Mara, who'd fallen asleep under her blanket, headphones askew. As Carla gathered the remaining folders, she glanced once toward Richard. "If you're going to burn the house down, just be sure you're not still inside when it goes." Richard met her eyes. "Then, help me build the fire." Carla didn't smile, but she didn't say no. The morning light barely reached the windows of Coal Industries. It filtered in through tempered glass in soft, sterile beams, muted by rain and tinted panes. The 31st floor felt colder than usual, not in temperature, but in trust. Richard stood alone in the elevator, eyes fixed on the floor display, though his mind was elsewhere. His phone was in his palm, screen dark. He wasn't reading emails. He wasn't answering calls. He was recording. The app, NoteSafe, was disguised as a calendar widget. One tap, and it began capturing every whispered conversation, every backhanded compliment exchanged in tight corridors and glass-walled rooms. Paranoia wasn't new here, but now Richard wore it like a second suit. The elevator stopped on 29. Two junior managers stepped in, chatting in clipped tones about budgets, about the sudden auditing freeze on Department F. Richard said nothing. He blinked slowly, and NoteSafe kept listening. When they stepped off, Richard remained inside. The doors closed. He tapped the screen again, saved the audio. Every truth needed a trail. By midday, Richard had what he needed: the internal logins, the phantom vendor accounts, and the names that didn't belong. But he needed confirmation from someone outside the echo chamber. That someone was Samuel. They met in a side cafe 2 blocks away, somewhere with poor lighting and no glass walls. Richard arrived first. Samuel entered 5 minutes later, a trench coat soaked through and a familiar briefcase in hand. "You look like hell," Samuel said, sliding into the booth. "I feel worse," Richard replied, sliding over a folder. "You still have that contact at Monroe Forensics?" Samuel raised an eyebrow. "The one who made a hedge fund cry in court last year? Ivy. You sure you want her looking into this? She's not cheap. She's thorough." Samuel opened the folder, skimmed the top pages. His brow furrowed. "Some of this was manually altered," he said. "But whoever did it didn't just fake numbers. They mimicked the rhythm, the phrasing, the structure. They knew your system." Richard stirred his coffee once. "Which means it was someone inside." "No," Samuel said, flipping to a flagged invoice. "It was someone close, someone with admin rights, access to your backup structures. You're not looking at a hacker. You're looking at an architect." Richard's jaw clenched. "Logan." "Ivy will verify it," Samuel continued. "She has forensic tools I don't. Give her a day, maybe less." Richard nodded and passed over the encrypted drive Carla had given him. "It's all on there." Samuel pocketed it. "You're playing a dangerous game, Richard." "I'm not playing," he said. Back in the office, Richard logged into a terminal in the finance department. It was after hours. Most of the staff had left. The few who remained kept their heads down. Olivia had given him temporary access under the guise of internal audit prep. No one questioned it. Yet. He pulled up the internal camera logs. Access denied. Admin override required. He tried again, this time through a back channel Jonah had built for him last year, meant for test environments. It worked. The cameras loaded one by one. Floor 29, floor 31, the server room. Richard rewound to the last week of the previous quarter. There, Logan, entering the server room after 11 p.m. Alone. No IT badge sign-in, no motion alerts forwarded to security. Just a man with a keycard and too much confidence. Richard clicked capture frame, saved it, marked it. His phone buzzed an hour later. "Felix, check your inbox. Sent you a map. Easier than digging line by line." Richard opened the email. A PDF unfolded like a conspiracy laid bare. Arrows connecting shell companies, vendor codes cross-referenced with dates. In the center, highlighted in red, was the name of one entity Richard knew too well. Malvern Partners, LLP, a vendor supposedly dissolved 2 years ago. He checked the ledger. The payments were still going out. Slow, steady, hidden in consulting fees. Richard sat back, staring at the name like it might dissolve under his gaze. A message came in from Ivy Monroe. "Ivy Monroe, checked metadata. Your boy Felix's doc is solid. Cross-reference matches with my ledger samples. But Richard. Then another message came in, just a single line. Ivy Monroe. Check the sender on the original vendor contract. You won't like what you find. Richard reopened the file. He scrolled to the sender field, buried deep in the document's version history. The name that popped up wasn't Logan's. It was someone else. Howard Levin. His breath caught. The former board chair. The man who was supposed to be clean. The man who disappeared quietly from the boardroom just weeks before everything unraveled. Samuel had said, Howard asked too many questions. But what if he hadn't stepped down? What if he'd been silenced? What if he was part of it? Richard closed the laptop slowly. He wasn't just standing in the middle of a burning building anymore. He was inside a maze of smoke, and the exits were moving. The office lights outside Logan's suite were dimmed. Past the frosted glass, the hallway looked abandoned, like a place left out of time. Inside, the air was cool and stale, untouched by the warmth of conversation or trust. Richard stepped in without knocking. Olivia had buzzed him through. Her only words a flat, "He's expecting you." But her eyes had lingered on Logan's door, like she was silently bracing for impact. Maybe she was hoping for it. Logan stood at the far end of the room, his back turned, hands clasped behind him as he stared through the towering windows into the darkened cityscape. He didn't turn when Richard entered. Didn't need to. "Funny," Logan said, voice smooth as polished glass. "The man who built the empire starts knocking like a stranger." "I didn't knock," Richard replied, closing the door behind him. "Didn't think I needed permission in a building with my name on it." That made Logan turn. Slowly. His smile was tight, practiced, and void of real warmth. "Yet here we are," he said. "Two ghosts playing kings in an empty castle." Richard didn't sit. He remained standing, coat still on, eyes unmoving. "Thought we should talk," he said. "About what?" Logan asked, circling behind his desk but not sitting. "The weather? The board's sudden anxiety? Or the file you and Samuel have been tiptoeing around for days?" Richard said nothing. "I know when I'm being watched," Logan added, voice quieter. "I know every movement in this building, every login, every redirected terminal." "You missed one," Richard said calmly. "Or maybe you just thought no one would notice you visiting the server room at 11 p.m. Logan's smile faltered. Just a breath. "You're reaching." "No," Richard said. "I'm confirming." A pause. A beat too long. Then Logan leaned forward, placing both hands on his desk. "You're digging up things that should stay buried, Richard. You think you found some smoking gun, something with a signature, a number that doesn't add up." Richard stepped closer. "I found a pattern, a structure, vendor shells and silent payouts, and a project name, Alpha." The room changed. Logan blinked once, just once. "That was Carla's obsession," he said too quickly. "She couldn't let go of it, kept whispering about Alpha like it was some holy grail." Richard tilted his head. "I never mentioned Alpha." Silence. The color behind Logan's eyes shifted, like a tide suddenly aware it was retreating, but his face held. "That's what this is?" Logan asked, standing straighter now. "You show up, slinging half-truths and PDF screenshots, thinking you'll corner me with a ghost story." Richard didn't flinch. "You just said the name of a project never filed, never discussed on paper. Carla mentioned it only once, in a file deleted 3 years ago. To me." Logan gave a dry laugh, walked around his desk and to the bar cart in the corner. He poured whiskey into a heavy glass, the sound louder than necessary in the quiet. "You're desperate," he said, "and desperation makes people stupid." He turned, glass in hand. "You think anyone on the board will back you? Howard's gone. Grace folds with the wind. Victor's out. Olivia? He smirked. She still types your memos, but she stopped believing them months ago. Richard took a breath. I don't need them to believe me, he said. I just need them to listen. To what? A file from a woman we cut loose years ago. The word of a kid with a USB stick and too much time on his hands. Logan sipped, then set the glass down. You're not strong enough anymore, Richard. No one stands behind you. You're a shadow, walking through your own company. Richard walked to the desk and placed a photo down. It was a printed frame from the security footage. Logan, alone, in the server room. I'm not alone, Richard said. I've got ghosts, and they remember everything. Logan stared at the photo, then back at him. This stays in my drawer, he said, stepping around and pulling open a desk drawer. From it, he slid out a sheet of paper. Official letterhead, a draft of a board motion. Motion to remove Richard Cole as acting CEO, pending internal audit, Richard read aloud. Not signed, Logan said. Not filed, not yet. Depends on how loud you plan to be. Richard picked up the paper, turned it in his hands. You're bluffing, he said. No, Logan replied. I'm warning you. Richard folded the paper once, twice, slid it into his coat pocket. Then you'd better hope I stay quiet. He turned toward the door. Because if I don't, he said, pausing with one hand on the handle, you'll need more than a draft letter to stop what's coming. Logan said nothing, but as Richard walked out, he noticed something for the first time since entering. The light above Logan's desk flickered, just once, as if something had shifted in the wiring, something unstable. The apartment was quiet, but not still. The overhead light flickered every so often, casting thin shadows that stretched across the table and retreated again. Outside, the city murmured in low pulses, but inside Carla Blake's living room, the world had narrowed to numbers, names, and the weight of what tomorrow might bring. Felix sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop glowing blue against his face, fingers flying across the keyboard as he refined the final slide. Around him were printouts, scribbled diagrams, a half-eaten apple he'd forgotten. Carla was at the table, bent over a page with a red pen, adjusting a decimal with precise care, pausing every few minutes to double-check a margin or cross-validate an entry. Richard stood by the window, jacket off, sleeves rolled, watching them, not speaking, just taking in the motion of something strangely familiar. Focus, purpose, a kind of harmony. Behind him, Mara moved quietly. She peeled small, sticky notes, yellow and green, and placed them on the corners of each printed slide, spread across the table. So, they know where to look first, she explained, half to herself. Big people always skip the important parts. Richard glanced at her and smiled. You might be the smartest strategist in the room. She shrugged and returned to her post-it army. Carla didn't look up. She's not wrong. The room fell into that soft kind of silence again. Not heavy, not awkward, but shared. The kind that holds 1,000 unspoken agreements. Richard checked his phone. A new message blinked from Olivia. Olivia Tran. Logan is calling an executive session tonight. Just board members. Thought you'd want to know. He exhaled slowly and set the phone down. He's making his move, he said. Carla underlined a number and handed Felix the page. Then he's worried, she replied simply. Felix glanced at both of them. Does it matter if he goes first? Richard moved to the table and looked down at the deck they'd built, slide by slide, file by file. No drama, just facts, arranged like steel rivets in a collapsing hull. No, he said, it only matters that we finish. Felix clicked into the final slide. I added something, he said. Richard leaned in. The slide was nearly blank. Just a single line of text, white on black. If you knew and did nothing, are you still innocent? Richard stared at it for a moment, then nodded. Make that the closing. Carla paused, eyes meeting his for the first time in minutes. You think they'll care? I think they'll have to, he said. It's not just the money now, it's the mirror. She gave the faintest of nods, then returned to the spreadsheet. A few minutes passed. The kettle clicked off in the kitchen. Mara tiptoed over to pour tea like it was a ritual. Felix yawned, but didn't stop typing. Richard sat down across from Carla. I didn't expect this, he said quietly. Not from me. Not from any of this. She didn't answer right away. She corrected one more figure, then another. Finally, she looked up. No one ever does. Until it's too late. He studied her tired eyes, her steady hands. The calm that wasn't peace, but resolve. Then he glanced at Felix, his face now inches from the screen as he aligned text boxes. Mara, sipping tea like a soldier in a war room. Richard leaned back and let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Maybe, he said, voice light. This is the executive team I was always meant to have. Felix glanced up, grinning faintly. We don't take salaries, just justice. Carla smirked, dry but not cold. And we have better coffee. Richard chuckled. For the first time in weeks, the sound was genuine. Then, quieter, he added, Thank you, both of you, for trusting me when you didn't have to. Carla looked at him. We didn't do it for you, she said. He nodded. I know. A long silence settled. The kind before decisions. Before action. Richard picked up a pen and tore a page from the corner of a spreadsheet. He wrote something down, carefully, deliberately, then folded it and left it between the keyboard and the lamp. Felix noticed. What's that? Richard smiled faintly. A reminder. When Felix unfolded it later, the words were simple. Not for revenge, for balance. And in that moment, with numbers aligned, files loaded, truth sharpened to a fine point. Nothing else needed to be said. The boardroom was bathed in morning light, but it felt colder than any night before. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Seattle skyline, still, grey, indifferent. The table stretched long and quiet, like a runway no one was sure how to land on. Richard sat at the head of the table. No notes, no laptop. Just a closed folder and a face that looked like it had aged 5 years in the past 5 weeks. Around him, familiar faces wore unfamiliar expressions. Tight, unreadable. Grace sat 2 chairs down, fingers folded over a leather planner. She had looked at him when he entered, then looked away. Next to her, Victor's replacement, Jordan Miles, adjusted his tie for the 3rd time, eyes darting. Across the table, Logan leaned back in his seat, one arm slung casually along the chair's edge, the picture of ease he hadn't earned. Shall we begin? Logan asked, his voice the only thing in the room that dared to stretch. Richard didn't respond. Instead, he looked toward the door. It opened. Carla Blake stepped in. No blazer, no posture of performance, just calm, composed gravity. She walked with the stillness of someone who'd been here before, once burned by it. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Logan. Just enough for him to see she wasn't afraid. Logan shifted. This isn't protocol, he said, sitting forward. Who is this? Richard stood. This is Carla Blake, former financial analyst, terminated under questionable internal review 3 years ago. He looked around the room. She has something to share. Grace's head snapped toward Logan. He blinked. Just once. Carla didn't raise her voice. I brought with me original ledger logs, signed contracts with tampered routing codes, and a copy of an email string between myself and compliance that was deleted from the system shortly before my dismissal. She paused, laying a thin folder on the table. "And I brought my son." The door opened again. Felix entered, laptop hugged tight to his chest. He didn't look nervous. He looked certain. Without a word, he connected the HDMI cable to the screen behind them. The display blinked, then lit up. A paused video. File name. Archived audio log. Capture 1. Logan stood. "This is ridiculous." Richard raised a hand. "We're not voting. We're listening." Logan turned to the board. "He's staging a show. You can't seriously—" "Sit down, Logan," Grace said. Her voice cut clean through the air. Everyone froze, even Richard. She didn't look at Logan. She looked at the screen. Felix hit play. The recording began with grainy video, a boardroom, not unlike the one they sat in now. A younger accountant, pale, seated at the far end, Logan pacing. "Just adjust it, Michael. No one's watching that column." "But sir, this amount doesn't match." "Mr. Levin already signed off. You're not the only one who wants to keep their job." At that line, Felix paused the clip. Silence filled the room like smoke. Then, one voice. "Grace. Rewind 5 seconds." Felix complied. They listened again, slower. "Mr. Levin already signed off." Logan spoke before anyone else could. "That proves nothing. That could be edited. You have no timestamp, no metadata." Carla placed a second folder on the table. "It's all there." Samuel stood up from the side of the room. No one had noticed him enter. "This," he said, lifting a sealed envelope, "is a formal request for external audit, signed by over half of your shareholders." Logan turned red. "You set me up," he hissed toward Richard. "You built this moment. You planted—" Richard's voice was low, even. "You did that yourself." Logan looked around. No one met his eyes. Not Grace, not Jordan, not even the younger associates who used to nod when he walked by. He stepped back, then scoffed, grabbing his briefcase. "You think this saves you?" he spat. "It only proves how naive you are." No one stopped him. He slammed the door on the way out. The room remained silent. Then, a single pair of hands began to clap. Slow, steady. An older man at the far end of the table, grey-haired, silent until now. Henry Lannister, one of the company's longest investors, former advisor to Richard's father. "I've sat in this room for 40 years, he said, still clapping. "And this is the first honest meeting I've witnessed in the last 10. Grace stood. So did Jordan. Then the rest. Richard didn't speak. He just exhaled, and for the first time in a long while it wasn't from exhaustion. Beside him, Felix disconnected the laptop. Carla didn't smile, but she nodded once. Sharp. Final. And outside the window, the city was no longer grey. The clouds had begun to break. Just barely. The office was different now. The furniture had been shifted, the blinds left open, and the air smelled faintly of lemon and something else. Something like beginning again. Morning sunlight poured through the windows, catching the green leaves of 2 new potted plants stationed near the corners, like silent sentinels of change. Richard stood in the doorway of his glass-walled office, watching Carla at her new desk across the hall. She wasn't unpacking with haste, just placing things with quiet precision. A coffee mug. A calculator that looked older than the building. A framed photo of Felix and Mara at a science fair. He smiled. Behind him, Olivia walked in holding a ceramic pot with a snake plant and set it beside the window. "Symbol of resilience," she said, straightening it carefully. "Hard to kill. Doesn't need much to survive. Thought it suited the new space." Richard raised a brow. "The plant or us?" Olivia smiled faintly. "Bit of both." She started to leave, then paused at the door. "I like this version of the office. Less glass, more light. "Thanks for staying," Richard said. "I didn't stay," she replied. "I came back." Richard watched her go. Across the hall, Carla was reviewing the latest vendor audit, a red pen in hand. He walked over and leaned against the doorway. "You sure you're comfortable with the title?" he asked. "Chief Financial Officer. Full privileges, full vote." Carla looked up, expression unreadable. "You offering me power or responsibility?" "Both." She considered that. "Then let me use my old title, Financial Steward. I don't need to be on the masthead. I just want the ship to stay upright." Richard nodded, respecting the choice more than she probably knew. Felix popped his head into the room then, a messenger bag slung across his shoulder. "They're here," he said. "Who?" Carla asked. "The interns." He grinned. "I'm late for my first official mentoring session." Richard laughed softly. "Try not to intimidate them." Felix shrugged. "I only know how to be brilliant quietly." Carla raised an eyebrow. "Since when?" But she smiled as she said it, and Felix bounced down the hall, humming under his breath. Richard watched him go. "You think he's really ready for this?" Carla didn't look up from her audit. "He was ready before you were." There was truth in that. Later that afternoon, Richard returned to his desk to find a postcard resting on top of a sealed envelope. The postcard was old-fashioned, textured at the corners. A black and white photo of a typewriter. On the back, in tight cursive, "Steady hands build longer than strong fists. You chose well. H.L. Henry Lannister." Still watching, still backing, Richard tucked the card into the drawer without a word. The envelope beneath it bore the company seal. Inside, the official confirmation of Felix's honorary position, youth strategy advisor, and the enclosed scholarship letter from a partnered foundation. Fully funded through graduation, with a side note from the board, "For the boy who taught us how to see numbers differently." Richard walked down the hall and handed it to Felix, who was scribbling equations on a whiteboard while two interns looked on, wide-eyed. "What's this?" Felix asked. "Your future," Richard replied. Felix opened the letter, scanned it in silence. When he finished, he didn't say anything at first, just held it, then nodded. "Cool." That night, as the last lights dimmed and most of the building emptied, Richard lingered by the conference table, flipping through a folder of upcoming restructuring plans. Carla was packing up. Felix sat on the windowsill, legs swinging, chin resting on his knees. "I was thinking," Felix said suddenly, not looking away from the window, "maybe we should rename the company." Richard looked up. "Oh?" Felix turned toward him now, eyes bright with something more than mischief. "Felix and Blake Group," he said. "Has a nice ring to it." Richard stared at him for a second, then burst out laughing, quiet and full. "That actually doesn't sound terrible." Felix shrugged. "You said yourself. This place needed new blood." Carla raised an eyebrow. "And who exactly would be in charge of coffee budgets?" "Mara," Felix said instantly. "She already made a logo." Richard's grin lingered as he gathered his coat. "Well, we'll start with a nameplate. See where it goes from there." As they left the office together, the hallway lights flicked off one by one behind them. But ahead, everything glowed. Windows open, the city spread wide, the horizon clearing. It was still fragile, still new, but it was theirs now, and that was enough. What do you think about the journey of Richard, Carla, and Felix in this story? What impressed you the most? Their determination, their courage, or how they found each other through the truth? And after all, what lessons did you learn for yourself in life? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section below.